He didn't even notice when the briefcase slipped from his hand. It hit the pavement with a heavy thud, the metal lock snapping open as it landed. Bundles of cash spilled across the cold marble steps like green confetti in the wind. People gasped. Some froze. Some stared. But no one moved. Except her. Before we continue, take a second to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel if you believe in second chances and the quiet power of doing what's right even when no one is looking. The billionaire stood at the entrance of a towering glass building, his phone pressed to his ear, his driver holding the car door open. His name was Victor Hale, a man whose face appeared on magazine covers and financial news channels. His tailored suit cost more than most people earned in a year. His watch shimmered under the afternoon sun. His life was measured in profits, acquisitions, and board meetings. And in that moment, he was too busy negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal to notice that a fortune now lay scattered behind him. Across the street, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk with a worn-out backpack and shoes that had long lost their soles, was a girl no one noticed. She looked about 17, though hardship had carved years into her face. Her name was Lila. Lila had not eaten since the previous morning. Hunger had become a familiar ache, a dull companion that followed her everywhere. She used to have a home once, a small apartment filled with laughter and the smell of her mother's cooking. But hospital bills came like a storm they couldn't survive. When her mother passed away after a long illness, the landlord did not wait for tears to dry. Rent was due. It always was. Within weeks, Lila was on the streets. She had tried shelters, but overcrowding and fear kept her from staying long. She had tried asking for help, but people avoided her eyes as if poverty were contagious. So she learned to survive quietly. She collected recyclable bottles, did small errands for shopkeepers, and slept in a corner behind a closed bookstore where the wind wasn't as cruel. That afternoon, she had been watching the city rush by, invisible as ever, when the briefcase fell. The sound made her look up. The sight made her heart stop. Money. More money than she had ever seen in her life. Neatly wrapped stacks spilling across the pavement. The world seemed to pause. The traffic noise faded. The chatter dissolved. All she could hear was her own breathing. People were staring, whispering, pointing. But they hesitated. Maybe they feared cameras. Maybe they feared consequences. Or maybe they simply didn't believe it was real. Lila stood up slowly. Her legs trembled, not from weakness but from the weight of the decision pressing against her chest. She could take it. No one would suspect the homeless girl. No one ever looked at her long enough to suspect anything. With that money, she could rent a room. She could finish school. She could eat without counting coins. She could finally stop being cold at night. Her mind raced with images of warm beds and full plates. Of safety. Of dignity. But then another image rose, softer yet stronger. Her mother's face. Tired but kind. Her voice whispering lessons that no poverty could erase. We may lose everything, Lila, but we never lose who we are. That is the one thing no one can take from us. The wind pushed a few bills closer to her feet. Victor Hale ended his call and stepped toward his car. He didn't look back. Lila bent down. The crowd inhaled sharply. Instead of grabbing the money and running, she picked up the briefcase. One bill at a time, she gathered the scattered bundles. Her fingers were careful, almost reverent, as if she were handling something sacred. She ignored the stares, the murmurs, the disbelief. When the last stack was inside, she snapped the locks shut. The briefcase felt impossibly heavy in her hands, not just with cash but with choice. She crossed the street. The driver noticed her first, his eyes narrowing as she approached. Victor turned slightly, irritation flickering across his face at the interruption. To him, she was just another inconvenience, another stranger asking for help. But Lila didn't ask for anything. She held out the briefcase. For a moment, no one spoke. Victor's eyes moved from her worn clothes to the case in her hands. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by shock. He looked behind him and saw the empty space where it had fallen. He opened the case. Every dollar was there. The silence grew heavier than the traffic around them. Victor studied her face, searching for something: greed, deception, expectation. He found none. Only exhaustion and a quiet steadiness that unsettled him more than theft ever could. Lila simply nodded and stepped back, as if returning millions was as ordinary as returning a dropped glove. Then she turned and walked away. Victor stood frozen long after she disappeared into the crowd. That night, while Lila curled up behind the bookstore, hugging her backpack for warmth, Victor couldn't sleep in his penthouse overlooking the city. He had built his empire from ambition and sharp instincts. He trusted contracts, not people. He believed everyone had a price. But that girl had just shattered a belief he had carried for decades. The next morning, he did something he hadn't done in years. He postponed his meetings. He told his assistant to find her. It wasn't easy. No last name, no address, just a description and a memory of eyes that refused to look desperate. After 2 days of searching local shelters and scanning security footage from nearby buildings, they found her near the same street corner, sorting bottles into a plastic bag. Victor approached her alone this time. Lila looked up, surprised but not afraid. She recognized him instantly. He asked her why. Why didn't she take it? Why didn't she run? She shrugged slightly, as if the answer were obvious. It wasn't mine. 3 simple words. Victor felt something tighten in his chest. In boardrooms, he negotiated with men who bent rules and twisted truth for profit. Yet here stood a girl who had nothing, refusing what she could have justified taking. He noticed the bruises on her arms, the thinness of her frame, the quiet dignity she carried like armor. For the first time in years, he saw the city differently. Not as opportunity, but as contrast. Glass towers beside cardboard beds. Luxury beside loneliness. He offered her money. She shook her head. He offered her a place in a shelter he funded. She hesitated, then nodded. Not for charity, but for safety. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Victor kept visiting. At first, he told himself it was curiosity. A businessman studying an anomaly. But each visit lasted longer than the last. He learned about her mother. About the hospital corridors. About studying under streetlights because libraries felt intimidating when you had nowhere to go afterward. He learned that she loved mathematics and once dreamed of becoming an architect, sketching buildings in the margins of old newspapers she found. He saw potential where the world had seen inconvenience. Lila, in turn, saw a side of him the headlines never showed. A man who had grown up poor himself, who had clawed his way up and then built walls so high that no one could reach him. Somewhere along the way, success had replaced softness. One afternoon, Victor brought her a notebook and a set of pencils. Not expensive ones, just simple tools. He asked her to show him what she would build if she could. She began to draw. At first her lines were shaky, uncertain. But as minutes passed, confidence returned to her hand. She sketched community spaces with open courtyards, buildings designed not just for profit but for people. Shelters with privacy and dignity. Windows positioned to welcome sunlight into rooms that had known too much darkness. Victor watched silently. For the first time, his investments felt small. Within months, he arranged for her to enroll in school again. Not as charity, but as sponsorship. He set up a trust for her education, structured carefully so she would earn every opportunity. She worked tirelessly, balancing classes with part-time work at a local cafe. She refused to waste what had been given. The city began to change in subtle ways too. Victor redirected part of his company's development projects toward affordable housing. He funded scholarship programs for underprivileged youth. His board questioned the sudden shift in priorities, but profits remained strong. Compassion, he discovered, did not weaken business. It strengthened legacy. Years passed. Lila graduated at the top of her class in architecture. The day she received her diploma, she searched the crowd for one face. Victor stood there, not in a power suit, but in a simple jacket, clapping harder than anyone else. She didn't become famous overnight. She worked. She designed small projects first, community centers, low-income housing units, shelters that felt like homes. Each building carried pieces of her past, transformed into purpose. Eventually, she led a major project funded by Victor's foundation, a state-of-the-art housing complex for homeless families. It stood on the very street where the Briefcase had once fallen. On opening day, cameras flashed. Reporters praised the billionaire's generosity. But Victor stepped back and let Lila speak. She stood at the podium, her voice steady but emotional. She spoke about dignity, about choice, about how one moment can define who you are. She never mentioned the amount of money in that briefcase. She didn't need to. Because the true wealth that day hadn't been the cash. It had been character. As she cut the ribbon, she caught Victor's eye in the crowd. Gratitude passed between them, not for rescue, but for recognition. He had given her opportunity. She had given him perspective. And sometimes, perspective is priceless. If this story touched your heart even a little, take a moment right now to like the video, share it with someone who needs to believe that goodness still exists, and subscribe for more stories that restore faith in humanity. Before we end, I have a special request for you. Comment the word integrity below if you believe doing the right thing is worth it, even when no one is watching. Because years earlier, on a cold afternoon, a homeless girl chose integrity over survival. She chose honor over hunger. She chose to remain herself in a world that had taken everything else. And in doing so, she didn't just change her own life. She changed his. She changed a company. She changed a city. And she proved that sometimes, the smallest hands carry the greatest power, the power to remind the world what truly matters.